let me start with a very basic definition that most of you have seen, because in this lecture, we are trying to see some notions of distance and how these changed notions of distance can change some properties which we will call vaguely geometric properties, mainly on the complex plane. Okay, so and how this notion of distances arise naturally while we study properties of holomorphic functions, etc. Okay, so I'll just start with recalling this definition of a metric. Okay, so a metric on a set is a function d from x cross x to the set of positive numbers which satisfies these three axioms. Okay, that it is symmetric, there is this triangular inequality, and the positive definiteness, of course, that is built into this, and dxy equal to 0 if and only if x and y are equal. So this is the notion of a metric. Okay, now if you have a metric on a space, and if you consider, say, a curve. Okay, by this I mean a continuous map from an interval in R to this space. Okay, note that this metric defines a topology. Okay, so we can talk about continuous functions defined on these spaces. So we can define length of a curve. Okay, length of a curve as the supremum of all these distances. What this means is that suppose you have a curve like this, say starting from a point A to a point B, you can partition it like this. You can measure the distance between, because it is a metric space, you can measure the distance between these 2 points on the curve. Okay, and then take the supremum over all such partitions. Okay, and that you can define as the length. Okay, now whether the supremum is finite, etc., is a different question. So we may not try to define length for all curves. Okay, so for example, we can define that a curve is, say, rectifiable. Okay, for example, in complex plane, when we have the usual notion of distance, that means we call the Euclidean distance, that is distance between 2 points, say z and w is modulus of z minus w. Okay, we have this notion of rectifiable curves. Okay, so rectifiable, so there we can actually prove that any actually continuously differentiable curve is rectifiable, in the sense that this length will be finite, and that length has got this expression. This one sees in very first course of complex analysis. That means if gamma is a curve, that by that I mean gamma is a function from, so we assume that it is continuously differentiable from function from an interval to the complex plane, then the length of gamma is integral over gamma mod dz. Okay, by this I mean using the parameterization. So if gamma t is a parameterization of that curve, okay, so you integrate, you can shift that integral. So this will be integral from, say, 0 to 1 of modulus of gamma prime t dt. I have put a gamma t here, about which we'll talk later. This just means the length of that vector gamma prime t, or the tangent vector, or the, if you take t to be parameterized by time, that is the velocity vector. Okay, so if you have a metric, you can talk about length of curves. Okay, maybe not all curves. For some, say, maybe you can call a family of admissible curves. Okay, that means for which the length is finite. And then once you have a length, once you can define the length of all curves using this, that itself defines a metric. Okay, as in this manner. Suppose you have a metric, you start with a metric, and then you can, the distance between any 2 points, you can also define as the distance or the infimum of all the lengths of the curves joining 2 points x and y. Okay, so given x and y, you can consider all curves starting at x and ending at y. You can measure their lengths and the least or the infimum. Okay, okay, by this I don't, okay, let's go to that later. So the infimum of that length you define to be the distance between x and y. Then, sorry. Okay, yeah. So this infimum we will call the intrinsic metric. Okay, so this is also a metric. Now we are not claiming that this metric is the same as that metric that we started with, nor are we claiming that this infimum that we obtain is actually the length of a curve. For example, let us look at let us consider the unit circle. Okay, unit circle in say complex plane or R2, and this inherits the Euclidean metric from R2. That means the distance between 2 points is this distance. Okay, but we can see that there is no curve in this circle whose length which starts at say this point A and ends at this point B, whose length is this distance. Okay, the original distance that you started with, DAB. Okay, so this metric what we have defined could be different from the metric that you started with. Okay, and even if you have even if you define this metric, this infimum need not be attained even if this distance is the same as the metric that you started with. There may not be a curve. For example, there are situations like consider say R2, and suppose you remove this point. Okay, then you consider say 2 points, so such that the straight line joining them passes through origin. Okay, then the distance between them, the Euclidean distance, is the same as the distance of the will be the infimum of all paths joining A to B. Okay, if you consider various paths, you can see that you can make it as close as the distance of that straight line joining A to B, but that straight line is not in this space. Okay, so though the distance is the original distance that you started with, there is no curve which actually joins A to B having that distance. Okay, so these are some issues, but we will not go into the details of them because we are trying to focus on the complex plane and some distances that arise naturally there. Okay, because we will see that in many situations it is this length that is more interesting or more useful or relevant in certain cases. Okay, the distance given by the shortest path. Okay, so yeah, to illustrate that, let us see some situations where because usually we assume that the shortest distance is always given by the straight line. Okay, so let us consider an example. Okay, let us see. Suppose one person. Suppose this is a river, and then suppose there is a person here who is say struggling there. Okay, or say drowning, and then suppose you see this person from here, and then suppose you want to save that person, you want to reach that person, you are running towards that person, and then your aim is to reach there as fast as you can to save that person. Then this is a you can ask this question: what will be the? Of course, you are not going to think about the shortest path or anything. You might just run towards that person, but then that means you will take this path. That means the straight line path. That means you run, and then from here you jump to the river, and then you swim and try to reach that person. Okay, but then if you think about that, you can see that if you say, for example, if you take a different path, say suppose instead of doing that, say suppose you run up to this point. Okay, and then suppose you run up to this point, jump and try to swim. This looks a longer path, but you might reach faster this way. Why? Because in the first case, you actually have to swim a longer distance than compared to the second case, because you can't swim as fast as you can run. So it makes sense to reduce the length of the your path in the river where you can travel only slowly. Okay, so among the various paths, I am not saying that this will be the shortest path, because maybe there is a more economical way. That means you say you run up to this point and then tries to swim. Okay, so one of them, okay, it may not be the straight line. It could be the, so you see the two, that blue and green curves are the extreme, but the shortest path is something like that red curve. Okay, which is you run up to a point in between these two and then try to swim. So that will be the optimum. And which one is actually the optimum actually depends on how fast you can run and how fast you can swim. Okay, of course, if you can swim as fast as you can run, it will be the straight line. Okay, but that is not the situation usually. Okay, now this is the same principle that we see when the principle which is known as Fermat's principle, according to which, because most of you must have seen this figure, which illustrates the Snell's law. Okay, so the principle of refraction. So there is this angle, the angle of incidence, the angle of refraction. There is a relation, there is a sign relation between them. And then this relation can also be, Fermat interpreted this as, this relation can also be interpreted that the light is actually taking the shortest path between these 2 points. Okay, that means you imagine all paths joining these 2 points, say A to B. Of course, light doesn't travel. The velocity of light is not constant in all medium. Okay, light travels fastest in empty space. Okay, so in glass, suppose this is water or glass, it is going to bend towards the perpendicular. Okay, so that means the straight line path is not the fastest curve for the light, and the actual path you see, the path that you see is the shortest path joining A and B for the light. So light always takes the shortest path. Okay, that way you can interpret this. Okay, so all I wanted to mention is that the straight line, it's not the natural path or curve always. Okay, so it depends on the how fast you can travel, or it at each point. So that will distort your notion of straight lines or shortest path in this space. Okay, so now this is a very simple situation where the distortion happens only at the boundary. Okay, because if you take 2 points in the land or in, say, in water, this the path joining them is always the straight line. Okay, only when you cross this medium, this bending happens. Okay, but there are situations where this can happen in a continuous manner and in many, not just at the boundary of two media, etc. So I'll just illustrate that. So this is what is called the contour line. Many of you may be familiar with. So contour lines, so each of these contour lines is a, so this means so it is too small to see, but what it means is that each of the point in a single line, they are all at the same height. Okay, the altitude of all these points are same. Okay, so so if you look at the contour line, you can actually see the topography. If with some experience, you can see the topography of that line. For example, you can see that this here is a very steep area. Okay, because the lines which are spread apart, that means, say this is 100 feet, this is 200 feet. From 100 feet to 200 feet, you ascend using this much distance, but here that distance is very small. Okay, so this is a very steep area. This is a very not so steep. Okay, so and this again is so suppose you want to reach here, so this will be an easier path to take than this. This will be a steeper path. Okay, so suppose, say, okay, let us look at closely. I'm showing here another contour line. Suppose suppose you are starting from say, so a person from A starts from, say, A to B, and someone else, say, starts from, say, C to D, and suppose both of them walk from A to B along the straight line. Okay, and maybe at the same speed. And then imagine that you are watching from above. Okay, so this is some area, geographical, this is the contour line of some place. So this means that all these places here, they are at the same height from the sea level. So this is higher, all these places, this is higher, and this is like the plateau, okay, on a hilltop. Okay, so if you are walking, if one person is walking from here to here at a uniform speed, you will see that from here to here, he or she has to climb, and then they are coming down and then going. Okay. And then if you look at the path of another person from A to B walking at the same pace, you will see that if you look from above, suppose you are not aware of what is the topography of the region, you are just looking at that trajectory, or okay, say maybe some GPS relay or something, you will see that that person is actually, so when you reach here, you will see that person is actually traveling very slow. Okay, that is not just because he or she is tired because of climbing the altitude. Let us ignore that. They are traveling, they are walking at the same uniform pace. The thing is that these 2 points, the distance between these 2 points is not what you are actually seeing. The distance traveled by the person from A to B, from here to here, and here to here are not the same. Okay, so when you change the notion of distance between 2 points, you also change the shortest path. Okay, so suppose you have a terrain like this, a sensible person who wants to reach from A to B in a fastest, through the quickest mode, may take a path like this. Of course, this path is also possible, but as we discussed earlier, that may not be so these are all the options available with that person, but the shortest path is likely to be something like this. Okay, so if you have such a topography, it changes the shortest path in that region. Okay, so it is no more the straight line, and it is not like the earlier refraction situations where it's straight line everywhere, but then just bends at some border regions. Okay, so there is a continuous deformation of shortest path in this space, because your notion of distance, you are deforming continuously. That means earlier the notion of distance between 2 points, so here we saw it as the shortest time, but that shortest time can also be interpreted, or the distance can also be interpreted as the time taken to travel. Okay, assume that you are traveling at the same pace, so you can redefine the distance to be in terms of the time that you take. Okay, because if you are taking more time to go from here to here than from here to here, that actually means that there is more distance from this point to this than this point. Okay, so using that velocity or that speed, you can redefine the distance. So the distance between 2 points here is not the same as the distance between 2 points here. Okay, it is not the same as the distance between 2 points here. Okay, so how do you mathematically handle this? Suppose you have the same space, you want to continuously change the distance between 2 points in some way. So that is why, so you can look at this definition. One way, so how do you get the distance between 2 points? How do you get the distance or the length of a path? You are integrating the velocity vectors. Okay, in fact, the speed vectors, modulus of the velocity. So one way to change, of course, if you change the metric, that will change the shortest path. And another way is that if you change the length of the velocity vectors at each point, that will also change the length of the curve. Okay, that means what it means is that if you change the length of the velocity vector here, it means that the distance from here to here is no more the same as the distance from here to here. So suppose you have the two tangent vectors here, say gamma prime t. Suppose you imagine gamma prime t here and gamma prime t here. Usually we take the length of gamma prime t as its modulus. Suppose you change it. That means suppose you multiply it by a non-zero constant. Okay, a constant depending on the position. That means you take a function and then you scale it continuously. That will change the distance of curves in a continuous manner, like a situation that we see here. And then as a result, that will also change the geometry of that region, in the sense that the shortest curves get deformed. Okay. Now, this is all some general nonsense. Now, let us see how, so we are not going to do this for the sake of doing it. Okay. Let us see how this situation, that is a different metric or a different length for the tangent vector, etc., arises naturally in complex analysis, and what is the consequence of that in the for the geometry of that complex plane. That is what we are going to look at in this. Okay, so I think I can continue. So we are not taking up questions or anything in between, right? Anyway, I don't see any questions in the chat. Okay. But if any of the students, anyone wants to ask some question clarification, they can use the chat and then maybe.
Anyone is waiting?
Okay.
Please come forward, or you can text on the chat area. Anybody? So you please carry on.
Okay. 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 So yeah. So before proceeding, I'll just illustrate one more situation where this this continuous deformation of the length arises. So imagine that you are in a region. Say, imagine that it is a kind of a so we are not using the hill terrain here. Imagine that you are in a marshland. Okay, that means suppose the thickness of the marshes or the mud is changing continuously, in the sense that here it is almost kind of hard ground, but then as you move along, depending on the distance, it becomes muddy, a marshland, very difficult to navigate. You can walk only slowly, very slowly. Suppose that thickness of the mud or then the increases with respect to the distance from the center. Okay, so as you go towards the boundary, it is like it is you will walk very, very slow. Here you can walk like normal, but here slower, here further slower. The speed here and the speed here are equal because it just depends on the distance from the center. So assume such a situation. So this is the center I'll mark. Okay. Now suppose one person wants to travel from a point to another point. Okay, say suppose you want to travel from here to here. Of course, that person can take the straight line path, but you see, the straight line path means you are already in a very tough terrain, so you can take the straight line path. But an intelligent person may take a slightly a detour, many kinds of such paths. The idea is like what we saw in the Fermat's principle. Your distance seems, the distance that you see here seems this seems a longer path, but actually what you are doing is that you are avoiding that slower structures. Okay, here you can walk faster. Of course, you can walk all the way here and come here also. But among these paths, one of them, say perhaps this is going to be the optimum. Okay, not the straight line. Not the straight line. Say, so let us assume that something like this is the shortest path. Okay. And let us see a situation. Suppose this person wants to go to the center. Okay. Then you can see that there is no point in taking a detour. Okay. So if you want to go from here to the center, anyway, you have to go through all that region. So the best path is the straight line. So if you want from here to go to the center, you take a straight line path, but from here to here, you take a somewhat curved path. The actual curve will depend on how fast, okay, you travel at various places, etc. For example, so if you are from here to here, and if these two points are kind of diametrically opposite, you will take the straight line path. But if it is not, say from here to here, you will take a path which will be closer to the center so that you can travel faster. Okay, so there is no point in taking a detour here because you are not moving closer to the center. Okay, so here the best option is to travel along the straight line. So if you continuously deform your velocity vectors, okay, at each point, that means how fast you can move, it will change the shortest paths. Okay. Now this is what we are going to. So we are going to see some such situations in naturally arising in complex analysis. Okay, that is what we are going to do. Okay, so let us look at this. So first we look at a situation. One way this arises is when in elementary complex analysis, when we study meromorphic functions. Okay, so meromorphic functions are functions defined on some open sets. Okay, they are holomorphic everywhere except for some isolated what we call singularities, and these singularities, we know for a holomorphic function the singularities are classified as three types. Okay, they are either removable singularity, that means it is actually not a singularity, you can redefine the function at that point. Okay, and then the second type is pole, and the third type is essential singularity. So a function which doesn't have any essential singularity at that domain, okay, that open set, is called a meromorphic function. It can have poles. Okay, for example, suppose f of z is equal to 1 by z, such functions. Okay. Now, for meromorphic functions, as z approaches one of its poles, then fz approaches. That is something that you see. So limit z going to z naught f of z will be infinity if f has a pole z naught. Okay, so infinity naturally enters. So infinity can be seen as the value of the function at z naught. Okay, so you can redefine the function at z naught to be infinity, but then initially we may not be comfortable, see, because how to deal with a calculus of infinity, how to add infinity, all those things are questions. But we will see that for meromorphic function, there is a way to handle this in a nice manner. Okay, similarly, we also study the behavior of the meromorphic function at infinity also. In the domain also, usually we include infinity. So that is done by taking that. So if you suppose you want to study the behavior of a holomorphic function or a function at infinity, so you consider the function g of z to be equal to f of 1 by z. Okay, then the behavior of the function f at infinity, you define it as the behavior of the function g at 0. Okay, that is how you handle infinity in the domain. So both in the domain and the codomain, there are infinity will arise, and you can actually, so there is you can study actually meromorphic function from the extended complex plane to itself, and then there is this nice result that you usually see, that any meromorphic function on the extended complex plane, that means from the extended complex plane to itself, they are all what are called rational functions. A rational function, by rational function we mean a function of the form p by q, where p and q are polynomials. And then you can also see that there is a notion of order of that rational function, and it will assume all points exactly that order number of times, etc. So when that order is 1, okay, such functions are called linear fractional transformations, or they are also called fractional linear transformations, bilinear transformations, Mobius transformations. Okay, so they are transformations of this form. Fz is equal to az plus b by cz plus d. So this is a rational function. Both numerator and denominator are polynomials of degree 1. So the order of this rational function is 1. With ad minus bc not equal to 0, we will see why that is required. So this kind of rational functions maps the extended complex plane to extended complex plane. That means at the point, say z is equal to minus d by c, you treat it value as infinity. Similarly, this function will assume the function's behavior at infinity can also be studied by writing gz is equal to f of 1 by z. Its behavior at 0. Okay, so this function actually is a function from the extended complex plane to extended complex plane. It is actually a 1-1-on-2 map. Okay, it preserves. There are many nice properties that you study it. See, for example, any such fractional linear transformation is a composition of dilations. Dilation means z going to say lambda times z. Translations, z going to say z plus alpha, and inversions, z going to 1 by z. So these are the basic building blocks or basic types of fractional linear transformations. a composition of them. The composition of fractional linear transformation is again a fractional linear transformation, and the fractional linear transformations map, this is a geometric property, circles to circles in the extended complex plane. And by circles here we mean a circle in the extended complex plane. The straight lines are also included as considered as circles of radius infinity, infinite radius. Okay, and if you look at the equation in the complex plane, if you look at the equation of the circles and straight lines, you will see that they have the same format. Okay, say some constant times mod z square, some constant into z plus constant into z plus some constant into z bar plus a constant term. Okay, so this is the general equation of straight lines and circles, and fractional linear transformation maps such curves to such circles and straight lines to circles and straight lines. Okay, so the fractional linear transformation is actually a 1:1 onto map from extended complex plane to extended complex plane, and you can actually see that any such map which preserves angles, it also preserves the angle between curves that we have seen. Okay, that is one of the very first result when you study holomorphic functions. You study their conformal property. That means if two curves intersect at an angle, if you look at their images, they intersect at the difference, the angle between their tangents and the angle between the tangents of their images are same. Okay, so these are all conformal mappings from extended complex plane to extended complex plane, and here is where the Riemann sphere naturally enters the picture, because the extended complex plane can be naturally identified with this Riemann sphere. So what is a Riemann sphere? It is just the unit sphere in R3. So you identify the plane with the complex plane from the north pole, that means the point 0, 0, 1. So you take a point in the complex plane, you join that curve from the north pole to that intersects with a point in the sphere, a unique sphere, a unique point in the sphere. So this point in the complex plane can be identified with a point in the sphere. Conversely, you take any point in the sphere, you join the straight line from north pole to that point, that will hit a point in the complex plane. So this is a 1:1 onto map from the unit sphere minus the north pole, okay, to the complex plane. So every point in the sphere except the north pole gets mapped to a unique point in the complex plane, and one can, using coordinate geometry, one can actually work out that equations and then see that this is the map. Okay, the point xyz in the sphere gets mapped to this point, which you can identify with this complex number, and conversely you take a complex number, the point, corresponding point in the sphere is this. Okay, and now you can add, now you get a natural choice for infinity, because the extended complex plane, we have mapped every point other than infinity to a point in the Riemann sphere. Now there is a vacancy, which is the north pole. It is not just that is the only remaining thing, it is the natural way to identify, because you see that this mapping from the Riemann sphere to the extended complex plane is actually a homeomorphism if you define an appropriate topology on the extended complex planes, which you must have seen when you study in the topology. Those who have studied topology, they must have, some of them must have studied this notion of one-point compactification. Okay, so this extended complex plane, which can be identified with the Riemann sphere, is actually a compact topological space. Okay, and it also inherits. Okay, so so this stereographic projection also has this property, that means the following property, that it maps circles on the sphere to circles and straight lines in the plane. Okay, and it also, and you can also see that if you look at all such bijective conformal maps from the Riemann sphere to Riemann sphere, they are all given by the linear fractional transformation that we have seen earlier. Okay, so this is exactly the transformations, in some sense natural, the family of transformations corresponding to family of transformations preserving properties of the Riemann sphere, many properties of the Riemann sphere, their curves, etc. It is 1:1 onto, it preserves angles, and any such transformation is given by such a fractional linear transformation. Okay, now once you identify the extended complex plane to the Riemann sphere, you also can define a new metric. Okay, so to capture that topology, the new topology that you get by identifying the complex plane or the extended complex plane with the Riemann sphere, you can define the length between any 2 points in the complex plane to be the distance, the length between their corresponding points in the sphere. That means you take 2 points here, you have a Euclidean distance between them. Okay, now what you are doing is that you look at the representative of this point in the Riemann sphere, representative of this point in the Riemann sphere, you look at the distance between them. Okay, by distance, I mean the distance of the straight line in this space, not on the sphere. Okay, so this is called the chordal metric. So what is the distance between these 2 points? You can find the equation. So we have worked out, okay, this figure. Using that, you can define, you get a new metric. The distance between 2 points is the distance between their representative in the Riemann sphere. That will be something this. Okay, and the distance of the point with infinity. So infinity is represented by the North Pole. Okay, that is this expression. Okay, you can observe that the distance of Z1 between Z1 and Z2 and the distance between their inversion, that means 1 by Z1 and 1 by Z2. In this, you look at this form, you replace Z1 by 1 by Z1 and Z2 by 1 by Z2. You can see that it's the same. Okay, that is because it is like you take 2 points in the Riemann sphere, you rotate it. Okay, then their distance doesn't change. That is what is happening. Okay, you can also look at say you take a point, you look at the image of that point in the sphere. Okay, you look at its antipodal point. Okay, and you cut what is the corresponding point in the complex plane. That means you start with a point, you go to the sphere, you go to its antipodal point, come back to the Riemann sphere. So let's take a point Z to another point, say W. What is the W? You can work out. Okay, you can see that there is a simple expression. Okay, so these things you can calculate. You must have done. Okay, so what I want saying that there is this new metric. So the topology of the extended complex plane is captured by this metric. Now you can see that this is actually a compact space. This is a compact space in this metric. For example, you can see what happens to the point, say the set of natural numbers. So it is an infinite set having no convergent subsequence in the complex plane, right? So that is why the complex plane is not compact. Now you can see what happens if you look at even if you look at the sequence, say an equal to n, you see that the sequence an equal to n is actually converging to a point. Okay, so you can see that the distance of the, so if you take z is equal to 1 by n, what happens to that? The distance of it from infinity. Okay, so you can, using this metric, you can verify that you can see convergence of the sequences in the extended complex plane. You can convince yourself that this is actually a compact space. Okay, now what is it doing to the geometry of the complex plane? Okay, so that means if you redefine the distance in this manner, what happens to the shortest distance? So naturally, the distance notion is inherited from the plane. Okay, so if you take 2 points, here, the distance between them is distance between their corresponding points in the sphere. So if you want to go from this point to this point through the shortest path, you better think what is the shortest path between the corresponding points on the sphere. Okay, because corresponding point of the sphere. So its image under the stereographic projection is going to be the shortest path between the 2 points in the complex plane. What I mean is that you take, say, 2 points here. To find out the shortest path between these 2 points, you look at their images because the distance is the distance in the sphere. So what is the shortest path between these 2 points in the sphere? You move along that. That means you move along that corresponding points. Okay, so that will give you a path here. That is going to be the shortest path here. What is it going to be? You can see that the shortest path on the sphere, it is not very difficult to see. The shortest path on the sphere is given by what is called the great circles. That great circles are circles obtained by cutting the plane, cutting the sphere into equal halves. Okay, that means by taking a plane which passes through the origin of the sphere. Okay, so like this circle, this is the great circle, this circle, There are infinitely many such. This circle, they are all the great circle. But these latitude circles, they are not great circles. So the shortest path from a point here to a point here, which might seem at the same height, is not that latitude circle, but it is going to be the circle, the great circle through those 2 points. So if you want to see those great circle, you rotate it, you make one of them, you move one of them to the North Pole, you see that the distance from that point to any point is through the great circle. Okay, so you see that if you have this new metric which arises when you study meromorphic functions, the shortest paths is something like this. The shortest paths are images of the great circle on the complex plane. Okay, for example, some of them are straight lines. Some of them are straight lines because if you look at this great circle, its image is going to be the straight line. Okay, but there are some great circles like this. Okay, their image is not going to be straight line in the plane. Their image is going to be something like another circle. So these are going to be the shortest paths in this new metric. Okay, and that means they are all circles or straight line, but not all circles are like shortest path circle. One can actually work out that there has to be a relation between the radius and the center. Okay, this is the unit sphere. These are all the shortest path. Now you might think that this is just some like something that mathematicians do for a living, just redefine some metric and then find shortest paths according to that, but not entirely. If you look at this image, this is the trajectory of a flight, actually an Air India flight from San Francisco to New Delhi. And these people are not interested in such studying metrics for their own sakes. So this is the shortest path. This is not the shortest path. This is the path taken by this flight. Okay. Now, of course, I'm not saying that this is the shortest path because flight routes, there are many factors governing them. Okay. From India-Pakistan relations to the civil war and say Ukraine, all those things can affect. And there are this question of jet streams and all those things. For example, the flight back from Delhi to San Francisco is not going to take this route. Okay. It will try to utilize what is called the jet streams and so many things. But anyway, why on earth should a pilot move like this? Okay. Because the metric, because we know that our geometry is not the geometry of a plane. Okay, the geometry of the Earth is not a flat geometry. So these are the. So if you map this on a globe, okay, you will see that that is a natural path to be taken. Okay, or closer to the natural path. Okay, so if you look at this way in the map, this looks like a very far away from being a shortest path. But if you look at its, if you look at this figure in the sphere, means globe, you will see that this actually closest to the actual shortest path. Okay, so this is the natural geometry here. This is the natural metric on the surface of the Earth, because surface of the Earth is something close to the Riemann sphere, not something close to the complex plane. Okay, so these are the shortest paths in the complex plane under this metric. Okay. Now we are going to see, okay, now how much time I can take?
You can decide, Sanjay.
It's okay?
Yeah.
Till the last person leaves.
Oh.
Okay, yeah.
We started only at 10, 11, 5, 11, 10.
10.
So another 15 minutes are there.
Maybe I'll take some, okay, let's see. So then maybe I'll go a bit faster. So the other situation that you encounter in complex analysis is when you study what is called this result called Short's lemma. Okay, so which says that, okay, so suppose you have a function from the unit disk to itself, that means by D I denote the unit disk. You consider a holomorphic function to disk to itself. Okay, that means mod fz will be less than or equal to 1, and you assume that origin is mapped to itself, f0 equal to 0. Okay, then Short's lemma says that modulus of f of z will be less than or equal to mod z for all z, and modulus of the derivative of f at origin will be less than or equal to 1. Okay. And moreover, if at all equality is attained at any point, of course, f0 is 0 other than 0 in this equation, or at any other point, say f prime z actually becomes modulus of f prime z becomes 1 for some point, then this function has to be of this form. That means fz is equal to alpha times z, where alpha is a complex number whose modulus is 1. That means essentially it is a rotation. Alpha is something of the form e to the I theta. You know that rotations map disk to disk and they leave origin fixed. If you rotate, origin goes to origin, disk goes to disk. So if equality is attained, it has to be the rotation. But otherwise, for all points, modulus of fz has to be less than or equal to mod z. That means you take any sphere, any circle within that, its image is also within that circle. Okay. Now, the proof of this is not very difficult. It is just an application of what is called the maximum modulus principle. Okay, maximum modulus principle says that a holomorphic function cannot attain maximum in an open set. Essentially, you take any point in the domain, in its neighborhood, there are points where the function's image has modulus greater than that point. You take any point, in any neighborhood of that point, there are points whose images have modulus greater than that point. So a function, a holomorphic function cannot attain maximum in any open set. Okay. So this is an application of that, a straightforward application. You just have to consider, so fz is equal to z. Now, sorry, f0 equal to 0 means the 0 has an order. So fz has to be of the form z times another holomorphic function in a neighborhood of 0, using which you can see that if you divide fz by z, that is also a holomorphic function at origin, okay, near 0. And then you apply maximum modulus principle to that, because fz, maximum modulus principle to this function, you will get that this modulus has to be less than or equal to 1. Okay, because in the boundary it is less than or equal to 1 means in the interior also it has to be less than or equal to 1. So you get that mod fz or mod gz less than or equal to 1, which implies mod fz less than or equal to z. Now if you take limit z going to 0 here, you will easily get the second relation, which is usually called the infinitesimal version of the Schwarz lemma. Okay, and the equality case is also a consequence of the maximum modulus principle, because if maximum is attained, then that function has to be constant function. So maximum modulus principle applies to non-constant holomorphic function. Okay, I mentioned earlier holomorphic function, I meant non-constant holomorphic function. So if equality is attained, that function has to be a constant. Okay, that means fz by z is equal to a constant, means fz is equal to some constant times z. Okay, so these things you must have studied in the first course on complex analysis. So let us see what this says is that any mapping from the disk to disk that fixes the origin is like a contraction. Okay, if you take the usual metric, the distance of fz from origin is less than or equal to distance of z from origin. So it is a contraction. That is the meaning of Schwarz lemma. Now Schwarz lemma can be applied only for functions from disk to disk, which fixes the origin. Okay. Now this also shows that suppose suppose you have a 1-1 on 2 function. Okay, suppose you have a 1-1 on 2 holomorphic function from the disk to disk such that f0 equal to 0, then it has to be a rotation, because then if you take fz, if it is an onto function, then it has to be a rotation, because otherwise you have a mod fz strictly less than mod z. So these are the only options. Either mod fz has to be less than or equal to mod z for all z, and if it attains mod z at some point, it has to be the rotation. So the only 1-1 on 2 holomorphic functions from disk to disk that fixes the origin has to be a rotation. And now we can study what are the 1-1 on 2 functions from the disk to disk which are, say, holomorphic. So since they are 1-1 on 2, their inverse will exist, so they are also holomorphic. So these functions are called automorphisms. of the disk. That means a function. So the collection of all automorphism, by collection of all automorphism mean for a domain, all functions from omega to omega that are 1, 1, 1, 2, holomorphic, whose inverse is also holomorphic. Okay. Essentially, they are conformal maps because any holomorphic function preserves angles. Okay. So the collection of such automorphisms are denoted by automorphism gamma. So if you take gamma to be the unit disk, we know that any rotation is an automorphism of the unit disk. Okay, its inverse is also a rotation. What are the we know that now we know that any map which fixes the origin, any holomorphic, any 1, 1 onto map from the disk to this that fixes the origin has to be a rotation. But are there other automorphism that may not fix the origin? We can see that there are other automorphisms. For example, you consider such functions psi alpha, z minus alpha by 1 minus alpha bar z for a point alpha in the interior. You can see that this is a rational function. This is holomorphic everywhere. The only problem is when the denominator becomes 0. So denominator becomes 0 means alpha bar z has to be equal to 1. But alpha is in the unit disk. So alpha bar z means its modulus is equal to 1 only when mod z is greater than 1. So this has no singularity inside the unit disk. And one can actually verify by taking its modulus that this function maps the disk into the disk. In fact, if mod z is equal to 1, one can prove that modulus of psi alpha z is also equal to 1. That means this actually maps the unit circle to unit circle. It's interior to interior. It is holomorphic. Its inverse is also holomorphic. Its inverse is given by, has the same expression. It is actually psi minus alpha. Okay, so these are nice functions from the disk to disk, which are biholomorphisms of the unit disk. Now, using Schwartz lemma, one can easily see that these are all the holomorphisms of the unit disk. Okay, so that means any holomorph, sorry, these are all the automorphisms of the unit disk. That means any automorphism of the unit disk to itself, any automorphism of the unit disk, that means a map from disk to disk, which is 1, 1 onto holomorphic, whose inverse is holomorphic, has to be of this form. Okay, now we can prove that using Schwartz lemma. I'll just indicate what you do is that suppose f is a mapping from the disk to disk. It is now not fixing the origin, but let us take, say, it is taking some point alpha to 0. Say alpha is mapped to 0. Then you can, we have now many, we know about automorphisms now automorphism. So you take this psi alpha, psi minus alpha. So psi minus alpha is a function from disk to disk. It will map 0 to alpha. Okay, it will map disk to disk. So when you take a composition of f with this, what will happen? This will map disk to disk and 0 to alpha to 0. So this f composition psi minus alpha is an automorphism of the unit disk which takes 0 to 0. Therefore, it has to be a rotation. That means f composition psi minus alpha of z is equal to, say, e to the I theta z. Now, if you take z to be psi alpha z, psi alpha minus psi alpha z becomes fz. So you get e to the I theta of psi alpha z. So it is a simple proof that then f has to be equal to c times psi alpha, any such automorphism. Okay, and using the more or less the same technique, there is, one can prove what is called the Schwarz-Pick lemma, which is a generalization of Schwartz lemma. Because in the Schwartz lemma you have this restriction. What is that? Origin 0 has to go to 0. Now suppose you want to study mappings which do not have this property, they do not fix origin. Suppose f is just a holomorphic function from D to D. What can you say? This is what you get. See that mod f, instead of mod fz less than or equal to mod z, you see something like this. Mod fz1 minus fz0 by 1 minus fz0 conjugate fz1, that its modulus is less than or equal to this. And in infinitesimal version also, the analogous infinitesimal version is that not for f prime 0, but for any f prime z, modulus of f prime z is less than. And how do we get this? So this is true for any z1 and z1 and z0 in the disk, z1 not equal to z0, and as in the Schwartz lemma, and because this is all a consequence of the maximum modulus principle, if equalities are raised, the equality is attained either here or here for distinct points, then f is not a rotation, but f is an automorphism, any kind of automorphism that we have seen. Earlier we saw it has to be a rotation. Now we see that there are other automorphisms as well, which need not fix the origin. Okay, so f has to be such a function. Now, maybe I'll not go into the details of the proof because we don't have much time, but the idea is same. What is that? Suppose you have a function f from the disk to disk, you pick any point z0, you let w0 to be its image, you can play the same trick. What is that? You compose it with psi minus z0 and psi w0. Psi w0 will take both will map disk to disk. So together they will map disk to disk. Now psi minus z0 will take 0 to z0. F will take it to w0. And this will take w0 to z. So now if you take the composition, it is a map from the disk to disk that fixes the origin so that you can apply the Short's lemma. And Short's lemma, there are two conclusions. Now I'll focus on the second conclusion here. The first one can also be proved in a similar manner. Second one is what we are after now. So second one, now you apply the consequence of the Short's lemma for this map. Accordingly, the derivative of this function at 0, its modulus has to be less than or equal to 1. But if you work it out, you will see that the derivative of this is a composition. It is psi w0 prime at this point, f prime at this point, psi minus z0 derivative at 0. And then now this psi w0, psi minus z0 are concrete functions. You know what is the expressions. You can find their derivatives. You can differentiate this. You substitute that expression for the derivative. That means you can see that the derivative of psi minus z0 is this. Derivative of psi w0 is this. You plug in all that, you will see that modulus of f prime z0 has to be less than or equal to 1 by 1 minus z0 square times 1 minus w0 by 1 minus w0 square. Okay, or the other way. That means, yeah. So whatever. So you will get this. You will get this with z0. That means f prime z0 will be less than or equal to 1 minus mod w0 square by 1 minus mod w0 square. So that is for an arbitrary z0. This is true for any z0. So you can. This is true for any z0. So you can write that f prime z, its modulus will be less than. So this is a straightforward application of the Short's lemma. That is how you get this. Okay. And again, if the equality also, suppose equality is attained, then what will happen? So if the equality is obtained, that means this derivative's modulus is equal to 1. So Short's lemma says that means the composition function's derivative at 0 should have modulus 1, means this function has to be a rotation. If this function is a rotation, then you compose pre and post this psi w0, psi minus z0 with that rotation. You will see that f is a rotation composed by psi w0, psi minus z0. That means together they are all automorphisms. So that means f is an automorphism. Okay. So equality is attained only when f is an automorphism. Otherwise, it is a strict. Okay. So now let us see. So essentially, this one can, yeah. Now we want to understand what is the geometric interpretation of this. Just like the Short's lemma case, we want to understand what is happening with geometry. What is the geometric interpretation of this? To understand that, let us look at what is such a function doing. Suppose f is a function from the unit disk to disk. Okay, we know that a holomorphic functions do not preserve lengths or shapes or angles in a global sense, only locally. That means suppose you have two curves, say one curve, another curve. You look at their corresponding tangents. You look at the image of these curves. Look at their tangents. The angle between these tangents is the same as the angle between these two curves. Angle between the tangents to the images are the same as this. That is why you say that f or holomorphic functions are conformal. Now, suppose, now we know all the automorphisms of the disk. Now, suppose you want to define a notion of a length for curves, which is preserved under this automorphism. What is that you want to do? That means, suppose you want to take a curve, an automorphism that we know all the automorphism of the disk. That means all functions which map functions in the disk, points in the disk to itself. You take a curve here, its image will be another curve. Suppose you want their lengths to be equal. That means usually the usual length, the Euclidean length is not preserved under holomorphic maps. Suppose you want to define a new notion of length. How will you have to start working? So let us recall. So the length of the curve was given in terms of integrating the speed vectors, integrating the velocity vectors. So if you redefine the velocity or the length of the tangent curves, you can redefine the length of the curves. That is what we have seen earlier. So suppose you want to define a length which is preserved under this automorphism. What is that you have to do? So that means what f is doing is that suppose gamma is a curve, then gamma prime t is a tangent to that curve. F of gamma is the curve, its image. F prime gamma t naught is the tangent to that curve. You want their lengths to be equal. That means f prime of gamma t is actually f prime at gamma t naught. That means f prime at that point times gamma prime t naught. So f prime you can see as actually mapping a tangent vector to another tangent vector. You can see that the function is also function maps points to points. Now function also maps tangent vectors to tangent vectors. Given a tangent vector here, you look at the image of that curve, you get another tangent vector. How is it happening? For example, f is just in rotation, then the tangent vector also gets multiplied because f prime at gamma t is just e to the I theta. So if you start with a tangent vector here of length 1, if its length has to be preserved by all automorphisms, because rotations are automorphism, the rotations will take a tangent vector at origin to a tangent vector at origin obtained by rotating. Okay, because rotation maps 0 to 0. So the tangent vector at origin goes to a tangent vector at f of 0, which is again origin. So this map, the rotations map, just rotate the tangent vectors also. So if you start defining the length of a tangent vector at origin to be just 1, to start with, say, length of the vector, say 1, 0, to be 1, you will see that the length of all unit vectors at origin has to be equal to 1, because this is mapping just by a vector quantity whose modulus is equal to 1. Now, similarly, you can see what happened. What is the psi alpha is doing? The psi alpha will take this point 0 to a point alpha. So a tangent vector at 0 to a tangent vector at alpha. But how is it doing? It will multiply by the derivative of psi alpha or psi minus alpha. It will multiply the tangent vector by a factor 1 minus mod alpha square. So if you want to preserve the length of the tangent vector, if you start with the notion that the length of the tangent vector at origin is equal to 1, length of the unit tangent vector at origin is equal to 1, the length of a tangent vector at the point, say psi alpha z, that means alpha, if you want that also to be equal to 1, its usual length is 1 minus mod alpha square times the unit tangent vector's length, which is 1. But if you want that to be equal to 1, you have to redefine the length of the tangent vector at alpha to be its actual length divided by this quantity. Then only it is preserved. So suppose we define a new length like that. So we can have a new notion of length for curves. That means instead of integrating mod dz over gamma, suppose we define mod dz by 1 minus mod z square. This is a non-negative quantity. So this will also give a positive non-negative quantity. So you can define this to be the, so incidentally, this metric is called Poincare metric. So you can define this to be a new length. So if you have this new notion of length, let us see what the Schwarz lemma is saying. Okay. So first of all, we can observe that if gamma is a curve joining 2 points, look at f of gamma. What will be its length? Its length, this Poincare length will be, you integrate over f of gamma this quantity. Now, how do you integrate this? You have to go for the parameterization. So gamma is given by, say, gamma t. F composition gamma will be given by f composition gamma t. So it's the derivative means f composition gamma prime t's modulus. That will be f prime at gamma t modulus of gamma prime t dt divided by 1 minus mod f of gamma t whole square. That is what you are doing. Okay. Now, if you apply a change of variable, you can easily see that this is actually integral over gamma of this quantity, which is this quantity. You see that it is the length of the gamma. So that is how we started. Okay, that is what we wanted. So what we are seeing that if you define this to be the length of the curve, this length is preserved by any automorphism. That means if gamma is a curve, you measure its this Poincare length, and you look at its image, you measure its Poincare length, they will be equal. So any automorphism, as we wanted, preserves what is called the hyperbolic length. We will see why we are calling it the hyperbolic length. Let's call it hyperbolic length. And so there is an associated, so as we saw in the first slide, that once you have a notion of length of curves, it defines a new intrinsic metric. Okay, so the intrinsic metric is also preserved because length is preserved by under automorphism. So if you take 2 points Z0 and Z1, the distance between them is the infimum of all curves. Okay, joining Z0 to Z1. What is the distance between Fz0 and Fz1? It is the distance between all curves joining Fz0 to Fz1. Now, if F is an automorphism, you take any curve joining Z0 to Z1, F of that will be a curve joining Fz0 to Fz1. Because it is an automorphism, if you have a curve joining Fz0 to Fz1, it is the image, you can take its inverse image and you get a curve joining Z0 to Z1. As a consequence, you see that this new notion, this Poincare metric or the intrinsic metric associated with that is preserved under automorphisms of the unit disk. Okay, and moreover, so you can actually calculate this length. You can actually calculate. That means, so now I'll quickly go through that. We don't have much time. So this is the next result. This length is actually given by, so the length of a point from the origin is the same as length of mod z from the origin is given by this expression. And before proving this, look at this. You see, as z goes to the boundary of the disk, this length actually goes to infinity. So in the unit disk, now you have an infinity captured in the unit disk. If you then look at length of a point, as that point goes to the boundary, it is going to infinity. Now, how do we prove this? Proof is not difficult. First of all, you can see that this two have to be the same. Why? Because there is an automorphism which maps 0 to 0 and z to mod z, namely the rotation. Okay, if you rotate it, because lengths are preserved under rotations, these 2 points have the same length. So to find the distance between 0 and z, it is enough to find the 0 and mod z. Mod z is a point on the real line now. Okay, now look at this. So if you have a point 0 and r, you look at all the curves joining 0 and r. So let gamma t is such a curve. When gamma t is a curve, you can look at its real part. The real part is also a curve joining 0 to that point, right? If gamma t is a curve in the complex plane joining 0 to r, the real part of gamma t is also a curve, like piecewise smooth curve joining 0 to r. Now the thing is that if you compare their lengths, you will see that the length of gamma prime t, length of gamma is this expression. You have gamma prime t. Now, gamma prime t is always greater than or equal to, modulus of gamma prime t is always greater than or equal to modulus of x prime t. Okay, and modulus of gamma t is greater than or equal to modulus of xt. So, therefore, 1 minus xt square is less than or equal to 1 minus gamma mod gamma t square. This is also less than or equal to this. What you are seeing is that if you have any curve joining 0 to r, if you look at its projection, or if you just take the real part, you can see that its length will be less than or equal to the other curve. So this actually indicates, actually some more steps are involved. So this actually indicates that the shortest path joining 0 to a point in the real line is actually along the real axis. Along the real axis. Once you know that, you can find all the shortest paths because, okay, so now you can get the actual expression for that as well. So this is just this integral. So you can actually get what is the intrinsic metric associated with that new distance that we introduced. And what we see now is that now you look at any 2 points. What are the shortest paths going to be in this? See, if you take the unit disk under this metric, suppose there are 2 points. You take any curve joining them. See, there is a map. There is an automorphism which will map, say, which will map this point to 0 and this point to some other point. Now, so you get this this point to 0 and this point to some other point. We don't know what that point is, but then you can always apply a rotation again. That will keep this fixed and you can get a rotation so that these 2 points, so there, essentially there is always a automorphism which will map this Z1 to Z2 to 0 and a point R in the x-axis. Now you take any curve joining Z1 and Z2, so that will be mapped by F to a curve joining, corresponding curve joining this. Okay, so and its length is the same as this. So if you want to find the shortest path between these 2 points, you just have to find the shortest path between 0 and R. Now you know what it is. It is a straight line. So the shortest path between Z1 and Z2 is that path which is mapped to the straight line segment. Okay, under an automorphism. Now automorphism, these are all fractional linear transformations, and then we know that they map straight lines to straight lines. So this straight line segment is mapped to a straight line. But straight line, by straight line we mean the family of straight line includes straight lines and circles. So the shortest path joining these 2 points is going to be the image of this straight line. That is either a straight line or a circular path. Now see further, that same automorphism maps this circle to itself, because automorphisms preserve the boundary and they also preserve the angles. It means now you look at this straight line and this straight line or this circle, they intersect orthogonally here. Here their tangents are orthogonal. So the image of this curve and the image of this, which is itself, they have to intersect orthogonally. That means the image of the shortest path is a straight line or a circle that will intersect the boundary of the unit disk at 90 degrees angle. What can it be? If for 2 such points, if you draw the straight line, it will not intersect orthogonally. The tangents are not orthogonal. So it has to be a segment, a circle which will intersect this. Now, if these 2 points are, say, diametrically opposite, the straight line is the shortest path because this tangent is orthogonal. Now, what we are seeing is that the shortest paths in this Poincare metric are exactly what we saw, or not exactly, similar. What we are seeing is that it's similar to that marshland situation. So these shortest paths are like the straight lines or circles which intersect the boundary orthogonally. Okay, and you can also interpret the Schwarz lemma geometrically, which says that with respect to this metric, any automorphism of the unit disk, any holomorphic map of the unit disk is a contraction, and equality is assumed only if it is an automorphism. Okay, so the proof I am skipping. Now, what is the geometry of this? So we will not go into detail. Okay, maybe at later stage we can bring some expert in geometry to talk about this. So look at this picture. So what it shows is that these are all shortest paths in the unit disk. This is a shortest path. Okay, this is a shortest path. Okay, this is a shortest path. Now all these shortest paths go through this point, and none of them intersect this. Because remember, the boundary point is not part of your disk. Now what you are seeing is that there are infinitely many shortest paths passing through this point and not intersecting this. This is an interesting situation because in the Euclidean plane, it is one of the most famous postulates of Euclidean geometry. That means postulate means when Euclid developed geometry, you see what is called the axiomatic system there. That means he started with he first assumed certain things, that you know what is a point, what is a straight line, etc. It is possible to draw a straight line from any point to any point. You can draw a circle from any point passing through any point. And then he just accepted these 5 axioms and started building rest of all the geometry results from that, logically deducting. Now one of these axioms, the fixed axiom, was very famous because many people thought that it is not an axiom, it can actually be proved, which was the parallel postulate, which says that given, which can be said like this, not the Euclid version that essentially says that if you have a straight line and a point not in this, there is exactly one line passing through that and which is parallel to the given. So that was the parallel postulate. Euclid's formulation is slightly different. Okay, when it will intersect. Now what we are seeing is that we are seeing two collection of shortest paths. Earlier with the spherical metric, now with the Poincare metric, where in both situations this is not true. But they are not straight lines, you might say. Let us not worry about that. We will come to that. So in the spherical metric, you see that given the straight lines are given by great circles, and given a great circle and another point, there is not a single great circle that will not intersect this, because all great circles have to intersect each other. Okay, or all straight lines. So given a point not lying in a shortest path, there is not a single shortest path passing through that point and not intersecting your given shortest path. That is what you see in the spherical metric. Now you see in another way the fifth postulate being wrong, in the sense that given a point not lying in a shortest path, there are infinitely many shortest path points. So these both are examples of what is called, or models of non-Euclidean geometry. Models in the sense that in the modern understanding, or one way of saying, what you do is that you have certain axioms. It doesn't mean what the actual. We are not worried about what is the meaning of straight line or points. Okay, you define the properties between them. You define the axioms, and then any system that satisfies these axioms satisfy all the conclusions that you can deduct from that. All the conclusions of the Euclidean geometry can be applied to any system which satisfies the postulates of Euclidean geometry. Now, if you drop the fifth, so people thought that fifth postulate can be proved, and then when they try to prove that fifth postulate, so one way that people try to prove is prove that something can be is that by trying to arrive at a contradiction. When they looked at that fifth postulate, whether it is true or not, you see that you will never arrive at a contradiction. That means you can accept the fifth postulate or reject the fifth postulate. You will get a consistent geometry. Okay, that means that is called a. So if you drop that fifth postulate and you accept that another postulate that there are no straight lines passing through a point, you will get another version of geometry. Now that geometry is applicable to any entity, not necessarily the straight lines in your plane. Okay, you can start with any set of entities. You can call these to be straight lines, these to be points, and then if they satisfy the axioms, then all the conclusions will also be satisfied. You can derive the same conclusion. Similarly, this is what is called a model of a non-Euclidean geometry. This is a model of the hyperbolic geometry. In this model, straight lines, we define points to be points inside the disk, not in the boundary. That is the point. By a point, we mean a point inside the boundary, inside the disk. By a straight line, we mean the diameters and also the circular segments which intersect the boundary orthogonally. These are our straight lines. And then we see that this satisfies all the four postulates of the Euclidean geometry, not the fifth one. So what you get here is that you can derive conclusions. So you see that, for example, you can immediately see that one of the conclusions of the Euclidean geometry is that the sum of the angles of a triangle has to be equal to twice the right angle. That is a consequence of the fifth postulate. That is true only if the fifth postulate is true. Now here in the spherical geometry, you see that the angle is always greater than 2 pi. And in this, for example, if you take this to be a straight line, this to be a straight line, you can see that the angle. So here by angle, you mean the angle between the tangents of the curve. Okay, you can see that the angle here, sum of the angles will be less than or equal to 190. Okay. And another consequence is that I don't have time, but I'll just mention it. Another consequence is, you look at this. So these are the triangles in the. So this geometry we'll call hyperbolic geometry. The other geometry is this is a model of the hyperbolic geometry. The other one is a model of the spherical geometry. So that metric, the Poincare metric, is also called the hyperbolic metric. So what is a triangle? These are our straight lines, 3 of them. So this is a triangle, this is a triangle, this is a triangle. You see, these are smaller triangles, but not one thing. The distance is not the same. Distance between 2 points here and distance between 2 points here are not same. Okay, as you go to the boundary, the distance increases. The hyperbolic distance, the Poincare distance increases. So you can see that actually all these triangles are congruent triangles. That means they have the same hyperbolic area. It's actually a consequence of, one can actually see that, one can actually prove that in hyperbolic geometry, there are no rectangles. That means if there is a rectangle, you can subdivide it, you get 2 triangles. Okay, so if there is a rectangle, the sum of angles have to be 4 pi, but the triangles have angle less than 2 pi. So you can never get a quadrilateral whose sum of angle is 4 pi. It will always be less than 4 pi. There are no rectangles. As a consequence, you can see that the area of a triangle in hyperbolic geometry just depends on the angle. So if 2 triangles are similar in the Euclidean sense. In Euclidean geometry, you have 2 similar triangles having the same angles, but having different areas. But in hyperbolic geometry, if 2 triangles have the same angles, for example, these are all angles having these measures, pi by 2, pi by 5, pi by 6. You can see that here 4 lines intersect. Here, 1, 2, you can count. So these are all triangles having similar triangles, okay, having the same, these angles. These are triangles having this fixed angle, all of them. And in hyperbolic geometry, the hyperbolic area is same. They all have the same area. So I'll just show these pictures and conclude. And then what about this? This is another set of similar triangles. And see this. These are isosceles triangles. See, pi by 4. Sorry, these triangles all have all the sides equal, and their areas are also equal. This is how they are going to look at in hyperbolic geometry. And what about this? These are triangles whose one vertex is the point at infinity, not in the space actually. So the angle, one of the angles is actually 0 because these two lines are parallel. That angle is actually 0. Okay, and so these are right triangles because this is 90 degrees. Okay, four of them meet. Okay, so these are right triangles. One angle is 0 degree. Okay, and so this is a way of seeing the geometry of that space. Yeah, this one have all the angles equal, not this one, sorry, not this one. This is pi by 2, pi by 4, 0. This one have all the angles equal. Okay. And I'll just show one more picture and show, stop. This is actually a woodwork, not a painting by a famous artist, Escher, you must have seen, who was famous for his deep understanding of mathematical concepts and then representing that through art. Okay, so you can see the similarity between. So these are not just triangles. This is not just illustration. The idea is not to show the triangles. There are some other notions here because one way to study the geometry of a space is some geometry study how you can tile them. So these are tilings. That means similar looking figures. You can tile a area using rectangles, triangles. So as a consequence of the fact that the sum of the angles is less than 180 in hyperbolic geometry, you get many tilings. So these are various tilings. Tilings means these are all triangles having the same area. Okay, same angles. They fill the complete space. Okay, and this way also some geometrists study the geometry of a space by studying the ways of tiling that space. Okay, now this painting is actually a tiling by civil. Okay, it's called Heaven and Hell. If you look carefully, you can understand why it is heaven and hell. You can also see, if you draw these points, you can see what is called the shortest path, which are called geodesics in the space. Okay. Escher did this long back. So these paintings, these figures are all done. These days it is easy to do this using simple Python programs, it seems. This is a woodwork done by Escher. So the idea is that if you look at this, you should be able to see that they have all same size. So it is like a perspective painting. See, you know, when you draw a painting, so some figure standing at far is drawn at a smaller size. Okay, a big building might look smaller than a person standing in front, but we take it as a realistic interpretation. We know that the building is taller, but in the picture it will appear to be smaller because of the perspective. So this is a perspective way of looking at the geometry of the hyperbolic disk. Okay, so these are all this angels and demons of the same size, but as they recede to the boundary, the point at infinity, the way you see, due to perspective, they appear smaller, but they are all having the same hyperbolic area. Yeah, I think I'll stop.